Okay, so let's talk about a all right, let's talk about quadratics. Okay, so a quadratic is when you have an expression or a function that has an x squared as the largest exponent for x. So just x squared, right? And the standard form for a quadratic is you can have an a x squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so a, b, and c are numbers. So an example of a quadratic could be, let's see, 5x squared plus 2x plus 7. Okay, that's a quadratic. Now, if you have something like 2x squared plus 5x, is that a quadratic? There's no number back here. And yes, it is. It's also a quadratic because the largest exponent on your x term is the x squared. Okay, so that is a quadratic. Something like a negative 7x squared plus 8 is also a quadratic. But that just means that the middle term is a 0. You have a 0x here. So it's like a 0x plus 8. See? It's still a quadratic even though there's no term, the middle term here. As long as you have an x squared in there and no larger exponent, that's your quadratic. Okay? And today we're talking about factoring them. Okay, so I want to start out with some pretty simple quadratics. Like if you have an x squared, right? How do you factor that? Factor means you break it down to two things or two or more things that multiply to be your original expression. So what multiplied to be x squared? It's just x times x, right? Well, that's simple enough. Okay, so now if they add in the other terms, like say x squared plus 4x, what multiplied to each other to give you this? All right, so the way you factor this is you always start out with taking out the greatest common factor. That means each term, you want to look at each term and decide what do they have in common? Well, they each have an x, right? Because x squared is x times x. 4x is 4 times x. So I can take out an x. All right, so if I take out an x from this term, I have just x left. And I take out an x from here, I have 4 left. Okay, so I took out an x from both of them. I have x times x plus 4. These are my two factors. So that's how I factored that. Okay, and once I'm done with that, I can look at x plus 4 and see if I can factor that more. And I can't anymore. There's nothing that can multiply to each other to give you x plus 4. Okay, so I'm done with that. Okay, now if you have something like 3x squared plus 9, see, that's a quadratic where the middle term is missing. There's no x term. It's just x squared and a c. See, this is a, that's c. Okay. Now remember, you have the standard form a x squared plus bx plus c. This is the case where b is a 0, and this is c. Okay. Again, you want to see if you can find out what do they have in common. Okay. This is 3x squared, which is 3 times x times x. This is 3 times 3. What do they have in common? A 3. So I take out a 3. And what's left? I have x squared plus 3 left. Okay, so that is my factored form of that quadratic. There's nothing else I can do. I can look at this and see, oh, can I factor this? No, that's it. That's all I can do. Okay, so that's factoring. So again, the first step is always to find the greatest common factor. Okay, it gets a little bit more complicated when you have all three terms, right? So if I have 2x squared plus x minus 6. All right, now when you have all three terms, you can't just factor by only the greatest common factor. You can do other things to it, okay? And I want to show you how to do that. But you always do the greatest common factor anyway. So look at all three terms. What do they have in common? This is just an x, and this is just a 6. So do these two have anything in common? They don't. So you can't do greatest common factor. So you just go ahead and factor this. And I know you guys learned a lot of different ways of factoring, okay? But this is one way that's going to work all the time. So if you're good with factoring, you don't have to learn this way. But if you're struggling, learn this way. And this is the only way that you have to learn. Okay, so here I have A, B, and C. My A is 2. My B is 1 because that's the 1 in front of X. And my C is -6. Okay, so what you do is you take A and C and multiply them together. So 2 times -6 gives you -12. And then you make like a T-chart under that 12, and you're going to find two numbers that multiply to be this, okay? Ultimately, we want to find two numbers that multiply to be this, but add to be 1, which is B, okay? So I want to do that. And so I want to start with, what multiply to be -12? I have 1 and -12. How about -1 and +12, right? 2 and -6, -2 and 6, 3 and -4, -3 and 4, and that's it. So which two numbers multiply to be that and add to be 1? These don't add up to be 1 for sure. And I go down to here, and the last one actually, these numbers add to be 1. So I take these, and what I do is I split them. Okay, I split the middle term into these two numbers. So instead of 1, I have -3x and 4x, so +4x. Okay, so the rest stays the same. I have 2x squared in front and -6 in the back. Okay, so all I did was just take the middle term. You see how it's 1x here? 1x is -3x plus 4x. That gives you 1x. So I haven't changed anything. Now here, what I do is I'm going to group them, the first two terms, and I want to group the last two terms. Okay, and I'm going to factor. Let's see, what do they have in common? Factor something out from both of these two terms. So 2 and 3 don't have anything in common, but x squared and x do, and they have the x in common. So I'm going to take the x out. So I have x, and I take x out of 2x squared. I have 2x left. And I take x out of -3x. I have -3 left. And I take the sign down. I have plus. And I'm going to factor the 4x and the 6. 4 and 6 have what in common? A 2. So I take 2 out. And what's left? 2x. And what's left here? -3. Okay, so you guys see how here's the real important part. You need to have these guys looking exactly the same. If they look different, it doesn't work. Okay, so if it's factorable, you can make them look the same. So I end up with 2x minus 3 here, 2x minus 3 there. That is one of your factors. 2x minus 3 is one factor. And these guys here, that's your other factor. So it's x plus 2. Okay, that's factored. This way is a little bit longer, a little bit more complicated, but it's the most mathematically sound. Okay, so this is how the math works. Um, and it works all the time. So if you guys learn this way, you will be good. Okay, let's do another example. So I have x squared plus 5x minus 24. Oops, 24. All right, so what's my a? A is 1, B is 5, C is -24. All right, so let's make that T-chart. A times C, right? So 1 times -24 is -24. Make that chart. Which two numbers multiply to be this? I have 1, -24. Ooh, not 2 yet. -1 and 24. 2 and -12. -2 and 12. 3 and -8. -3 and +8. 4 and -6. -4 and 6. Okay, now I'm done. Now, which ones add up to be your b to 5? Which ones add up to be 5? Okay, which ones? It's going to be these guys. Okay, they add up to be 5. All right, you add them, you get 5. That's what you want. So you take these two and you split that up. Okay, so here the 5 is just -3 and 8 plus 8. It doesn't matter if you put them in whichever order you want. I can just switch that. I can put negative or +8 here and -3 back here. And it still works. Still works. So watch. So I put x here, okay? And x squared is still there. That's from the top. -24 is from the top. And then you group them, right? You group them. Make sure you keep the minus sign with that, right? So you have to put a plus here. So the sign stays with that number. And then you start factoring. What do these two have in common? An x. So I have x. Take an x out. I have x plus 8 here. What can I take out from both of these guys? -3. What's left? X plus 8. You see how these guys look the same? That's one factor. X plus 8. What's the other factor? X minus 3. That's from this guy and from this guy. Okay? That's factored. That's factored form. Okay? I will do one more and then we'll be done. So here I have 4x squared minus 12x plus 5. A is 4. B is -12. C is 5. All right, so I'm going to take A times C. What is A? 4 times C is 5, which gives you 20. What multiplied to be 20? 1 and 20, -1 and -20, 2 and 10, -2 and -10, 4 and 5, -4 and -5. Which ones add up to be the one that you want in the middle here? Which ones add up to be -12? It's these guys, all right? So the -12 becomes -2 and -10. All right, let's bring everything down. Put x, bring the plus 5 down, and bring the 4x squared down. And then you group them. Make sure you have a plus sign in between. All right, so I take out 2x here, 2x. So I have 2x left from the 4x squared minus, if I take 2x out of 2x, I have just 1 left, right? So -1. And minus is because of that. And here I can take out a 5 or a -5. If I take out a +5, right, I have -2x plus 1. And this does not look like this because it's +2x and -1. Here is -2x and +1. So I need to take out a -5 instead. So I take out a -5. If I take out -5 from -10x, I have +2x. I take out -5 from +5, I have -1 left. Okay. Then these two look the same. So that is one of my factors, 2x minus 1. And here I have 2x minus 5. So 2x minus 5. So that is the factored form.